The Cold War, 1963–1973. This is a new stage in the Cold War because the United States and the Soviet Union, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, realized how close they came into a real atomic war. 1 year later, in 1963, the United States, the USSR, and Great Britain signed a treaty aimed to lower the risk of a nuclear war. It was the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This treaty prohibited the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, in the land, and in the water. These three powers signed the treaty, and China and France, other nuclear powers, were asked to be part of it, but they refused. Another step towards the lowering of nuclear tension was the signing of the SALT I Treaty in 1972, which limited the amount of nuclear weapons. In 2002, the President of the United States, George Bush, announced the withdrawal of the United States from this treaty. But of course, this stage of the Cold War was full of conflicts. Let's see them. The Prague Spring. In 1968, Alexander Dubček became the leader of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia, and he started a series of liberal reforms. According to these reforms, the censorship was lowered and the individual rights, individual freedom increased. This period of time lasted only a few months, and it was called the Prague Spring, la Primavera de Praga. Of course, the USSR opposed these reforms because they could lead to pro-capitalist and democratic ideas. And then Czech people protested. The USSR reacted against these protests, and the Warsaw Pact troops invaded Czechoslovakia in August. Then the reforms were abolished. The Middle East conflict. There is a place where conflicts did not stop since the beginning till nowadays. This place is in Middle East. And everything started with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. The new State of Israel was created in the Palestine territory under the British administration, with Jewish refugees from Europe. Since the creation of the state, Israel had conflicts with surrounding Arab states. In 1973, an Arab military coalition led by Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack and invaded Israel. United States and the USSR supported both sides. United States supported Israel and the Soviet Union supported the Arab countries, providing them with massive supplies. Israeli forces resisted the invasion and counterattacked, recovering territory and invading Syria and Egypt. In response to the United States support of Israel, the Arab members of the OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, decided to reduce the oil production and later an embargo against the United States, Netherlands, and other countries. This embargo caused the 1973 energy crisis. It was called the oil crisis. The development of the war led to tensions between the United States and the USSR, coming closer to a near confrontation between the two nuclear superpowers. Finally, a ceasefire was imposed cooperatively in October the 25th to end the war. Military dictatorships in Latin America. Do you remember the Monroe Doctrine we studied in the unit about imperialism? It was America for Americans. For North Americans, actually. According to this ideology, United States consider all the American continent its area of influence. That meant they should stop or prevent the spread of communism there. And the communism ideology is an easy ideology to be spread in Latin America because there is a huge amount of population living in poverty. So the United States supported right-wing military dictatorships, backing coups d'etat to replace left-wing leaders. Examples of these dictatorships supported by the United States were Argentina under Rafael Videla, Chile under Augusto Pinochet, Guatemala under Efraín Ríos Montt, Nicaragua under Anastasio Somoza, Paraguay under Alfredo Stroessner, Peru under Alberto Fujimori, or Uruguay under Juan María Bordaberry. Also, the United States promoted civil wars, supporting opposition against democratic left-wing regimes in Costa Rica and El Salvador. The most famous conflict of the Cold War was the Vietnam War. The origin of this war was the decolonization process in Indochina. Indochina was a French colony. And after the Second World War, during Potsdam Conference, it was divided, the same way Korea or Germany was. The communist Vietnamese revolutionary Ho Chi Minh tried to create a unified Republic of Vietnam, but French authorities refused, and then a civil war started. North Vietnam became a communist regime, and South Vietnam a dictatorial regime supported by the United States once the French were defeated. Since the withdrawal of the French authorities, the civil war went on between the South Vietnam forces and the North Vietnam guerrilla. It was named the Viet Cong. United States supported the Army of South Vietnam with weapons and supplies from the very beginning. But in 1965, they started sending combat troops. The war lasted for 10 years more, and the United States was unable to defeat the Viet Cong guerrilla. Aerial bombings and the use of chemical and modern weapons were not enough to win the war, and popular opinion in the United States grew against the war. The huge American losses, 58,000 people and 303,000 wounded, plus images of tortures and assassinations committed by the United States soldiers, increased the anti-war movement within the United States. It's the period of time of the hippies. The new president of the United States in 1969, Richard Nixon, realized the United States couldn't win the war, so he started peace talks. Finally, Viet Cong authorities and the United States agreed a ceasefire in 1973, and the United States troops withdrew. Anyway, the United States went on supplying the South Vietnam government to continue the war, but a major offensive in 1975 from the north led to the fall of the South Vietnam capital city, Saigon, and the end of the war. Finally, Vietnam was unified into a single country. It was called the Socialist Republic of Vietnam in 1976. And the United States suffered their first military defeat, and a sentiment of anti-Americanism, this kind of feeling, spread around the world.